on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show, Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage. I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News. Hi there and a very good morning. I'm Colin Brazier with you until 2 p.m. Today. And today we're going to be looking at the case for releasing terrorists on parole. Getting on for 100 inmates will go before parole boards in coming months. Some of them convicted of terror plots that would have killed dozens here in the UK had the security services not intervened. Debating the wisdom of their release and the future now for Ghislaine Maxwell, potentially facing decades in an American prison after being found guilty on sex trafficking charges. That's coming up. But first, we've got the headlines with Olivia.
Good morning. This is your news at 10 o'clock. As we've just been hearing, Ghislaine Maxwell's family have launched an appeal after the British socialite was found guilty of helping Jeffrey Epstein sexually abuse girls. The 60-year-old has been convicted of 5 out of 6 charges in the US after a 3-week trial. Jurors found she lured young girls to be abused by Epstein between 1994 and 2004. Maxwell's sentencing date is yet to be confirmed, but a lawyer for some of her accusers says she faces a long time in jail.
These 4 women were believed, and now Ghislaine Maxwell is a convicted sex trafficker facing the rest of her life probably in prison because of the courage, the tremendous courage of these 4 women, and also the hard work of the police and the prosecutors and the attorneys who brought this case to justice.
The NHS is due to set up Nightingale Hospital surge hubs in England to prepare for increasing cases of Omicron. Work on 8 hubs holding up to 100 patients each will start this week. The NHS is also ramping up the use of virtual wards at home, where patients get monitoring technology and regular check-ins with clinicians. Meanwhile, leading scientist Professor Peter Openshaw says a shortage of COVID tests is very worrying. On the same day that the UK reported more than 183,000 lab-confirmed cases, a new record, no PCR or lateral flow tests were available to order online. Professor Openshaw, who sits on the new and emerging respiratory virus threats advisory group, is concerned the shortage could lead to people mixing at New Year without being able to test first. Officials are blaming exceptional demand and global supply issues for the problem. Well, nurses who are exhausted and overwhelmed by the pandemic are regularly working 12-hour shifts to keep the NHS afloat. A Royal College of Nursing survey of 9,000 staff has found that 74% regularly work beyond their shifts, mostly unpaid. The poll was carried out in October before Omicron hit. Many are unhappy with the quality of care they can provide due to inadequate staffing, and 60% are thinking of quitting. Joyce Pinfield, the Vice Chairman of the National Care Association, says the workforce are struggling.
We are totally exhausted, totally overwhelmed by the amount of work that we are doing. A lot of it is because of the shortage of workforce. NHS has a tremendous shortage of workforce, as does social care. So to try and have all of these extra burdens that have been put on by the pandemic, it's just unsustainable.
From January, insurers will no longer be able to charge existing customers more to renew than they would new customers. It follows a review by the Financial Conduct Authority that found many insurers were increasing prices for renewing customers in a practice known as price walking. It's expected to save consumers £4.2 billion over the next 10 years. Campaigners are warning major changes to the highway code, which could put more responsibility on drivers to look out for cyclists and pedestrians, are not being promoted enough. Charity Cycling UK says the changes, which come into force next month, need a long-term and well-funded campaign to make people aware of the updates. The new measures will introduce a risk-based hierarchy of road users. The Parole Board is considering the release of 92 convicted terrorists from prison following changes to how their cases are heard. Emergency laws introduced last year blocked the automatic release of terrorists after 2 attacks were carried out by extremists who'd been freed from jail. It's led to a number of cases coming before the board, including that of Nazam Hussain, who plotted alongside London Bridge attacker Usman Khan. Terror offenders must now serve 2/3 of their sentence before being eligible for release, which then needs to be reviewed by a panel. The Parole Board says they've brought in more specialists to cope with the increase in cases. That's your news update. I'll be back in half an hour with the latest headlines. Now let's return to Colin.
Well, you heard it leading off our news bulletin there, and it's our top story today. The British socialite Ghislaine Maxwell has been found guilty by an American jury of helping Jeffrey Epstein sexually abuse teenage girls. Maxwell has been convicted on 5 of the 6 counts, and that includes the most serious charge of sex trafficking a minor. The verdict was reached following a month-long trial in New York. It featured testimonies from 4 women who claimed they'd been abused by Epstein between 1994 and 2004. Maxwell now facing the prospect of, well, anything up to 65 years, theoretically at least, in prison. Let's turn to the political commentator, Benedict Spence, who's been following this story. Benedict, a very good morning to you. Thanks for coming into the studio. Appreciate it. There is, that tired old journalistic cliche, grim fascination, but there is a grim fascination about this case, but about this woman in particular. Beautiful, clever, networked, everything going, wealthy, everything to live for, and it goes this wrong, and we all wonder why.
Yes, all facets of the story. It's got something for everybody. Links to sort of American high society, British high society, the royal family. There, links to Jeffrey Epstein was friends with everybody. Ghislaine Maxwell knew everybody, and it is fascinating, isn't it, that as much as we're talking about Ghislaine, this sort of very accomplished woman, this very personable woman, actually throughout the trial, it's the spectre of Jeffrey Epstein himself has sort of hung over it. There's been this sort of feeling that, as much as she is on trial, this is as much his trial as anything else, because, of course, justice has been denied to the victims. I wouldn't say to Jeffrey Epstein himself. I don't think death is escaping justice, but certainly in terms of what his victims would have wanted, that was a very unsatisfactory outcome. So that, I think, has intensified all the interest into this trial. I thought it was very interesting. The Times have run a good piece on this, where they pointed out that Ghislaine Maxwell's father, when he was still Jan Huk rather than Robert Maxwell, when he was still in Czechoslovakia during the Second World War, he was tried by the Nazis for espionage, but he escaped on his way to court. But no such sort of escape for Ghislaine Maxwell, as harsh a sentence as you could possibly imagine. Whether or not she serves all 65 years or whether or not they are sort of combined and run concurrently is yet to be seen. But nonetheless, it's something, you know, again, to use a cliche, it has gripped people's attention because these sort of stories, they don't come along that often. And it is always people like that sort of pull the most focus.
And it's a story that will keep on giving because this is not where the matter rests, whether that's through the appeal. I mean, the family, the siblings have all been in court there for these weeks and they are determined to mount an appeal, we are told. And clearly there are other people in the frame as well.
Yes, I mean, of course there will be an appeal. There must be. Surely she's been claiming her innocence the whole way through. It would be very odd if there wasn't. But as you say, I mean, you know, even where there aren't actually allegations, just Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein's links to who they were friends with, the Clintons, the Trumps, you know, sort of every aspect of American and British society, they were in some way connected to. And there are people who allegations have been made against. Of course, Prince Andrew, we know very well. I wonder how his sweat glands are doing this morning. We haven't had any comment yet. But also Alan Dershowitz, who was interviewed by the BBC about this. You know, there is a long list of people who will be feeling sort of very uncomfortable about this. You know, and it must be said it's very important in many ways that that this trial did, you know, come to a conviction of sorts, whatever might be the case for other people implicated. Because there has been, you know, a lot of conspiracy theories and a lot of people talking about, oh, there's a massive cover-up, this, that and the other. What you have seen last night, today, is that justice can be served, it can be done for the victims, and that even the incredibly wealthy, the incredibly connected, and the incredibly powerful, like Ghislaine Maxwell, like Jeffrey Epstein, can be brought to justice. And that, I think, has to be borne at the front of everybody's minds.
And there will be those people in listening to that who say the obvious person who, in ordinary times, perhaps might be expected to look askance at the processes of justice, and that would be Prince Andrew. I was talking to Angela Levin, royal writer, yesterday about this, so we were talking about to what extent it's possible for him to go to ground. I mean, I don't think it's an unreasonable thing to say that he has become something of an albatross for the institution of monarchy. But actually, even if he were just to disappear on one of the grander royal estates in perpetuity for the rest of his life, he may yet be called into this legal quagmire.
He may be. I suspect he will escape any sort of serious repercussions. I mean, you know, there are perks to being a senior member of the royal family. But even if he never faces a court or anything like that, and I do think it's very unlikely, you know, in the court of public opinion, he has already been tried and he has already been judged. You know, some therefore might say that's a little unfair, that he's not actually been able to go through a proper process. But I think he probably only has himself to blame. A lot of that is based on his own decisions. And you know, that is something that he and the rest of the royal family will have to contend with for the foreseeable future, certainly for the rest of his life.
Benedict, appreciate you coming in.
Thank you.
Changing tack now, almost 100 terrorists are being considered for release from prison by the parole board. Terror offenders like those, we've pictured some of them here, Nazam Hussain, Jack Coulson, Rangzieb Ahmed, Javed Akbar and Abdul Rauf Abdullah could be considered for release from prison next year by the parole board. There are 92 active and ongoing terror cases, some that could come before parole judges. A decision to release or not is expected in many of those cases next year, some of them within the next few months. As for exactly how long, well, that depends on how long it takes to gather the evidence needed for hearings, as these cases often are very complex indeed. Terror offenders must now serve 2/3 of their sentence before being eligible for release. Well, joining me now, Chris Phillips, former head of the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office. Chris Phillips, very good morning. So you appreciate your time today.
Good morning, Colin.
That all sounds very complicated in terms of the parole process that we're potentially going through here, or some of these individuals are going through. But many people tuning in will look at the cases involved here, look at some of those men who were convicted, some of the plots that they were convicted of being involved in, and start scratching their heads. Because if there's one thing we know about committed ideological terrorists, it's that very often they crave martyrdom. They're pretty duplicitous, pretty good at lying, and often it's very difficult to rehabilitate them. They tend to be recidivists. They want to keep on doing what they did before.
Yeah, Colin, all of those things. And we have to bear in mind that these people are being treated as common criminals, people who burgle your houses and things like that. And, you know, nothing good in that. But they've been treated as, just the same as those are. And yet these are people that want to commit mass murder and have shown that. And it's not as though our prisons are changing their behaviour or de-radicalising them. They're coming out possibly even better connected, with more ability to commit offences in the future. So this is just a nightmare, and it just shows our criminal justice system is not protecting the public as it should do.
I mean, that's a terrifying prospect that you raised there, Chris, the idea that some emerge better connected, better educated, in quotes, than they went in. And we know that's a problem, don't we? We know that unless people are actually in isolation, not coming into contact with any other prisoners at all, then they can be exposed to people who will worsen their outlook.
Yeah, and the way it was explained to me was basically when you go to prison, you get into a gang, and the biggest gang at the moment is the Islamic radical Islamic gang. And of course, what they've done is build up links with people who've got guns, access to guns and firearms and other weapons, etc. So they come out effectively more capable of committing terror than they went in. And you know, we talk about 100 people here. This 100 people on top of thousands of others that the police and security services have got to watch. So you know, we have to be realistic. We are playing a very dangerous game by releasing these people, and to think that the police and security services can monitor all of them all the time is just completely crazy.
Just to take the other side of the argument, I can think of two high-profile public figures now who both maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago would have been considered, if not dangerous Islamists, then certainly very committed Islamists. And actually they've gone on to be quite important in terms of the national conversation about Islamism. Now, admittedly, they didn't commit violent offences, but I wonder if there is a danger perhaps in shutting the door tight on any prospects of rehabilitation for former terrorists, particularly Islamists who are committed to a particularly nihilistic ideology. If we are saying there is no way back, you will go to prison, but actually you'll probably end up staying there. Does that not send sometimes to some individuals the wrong message?
Well, yeah, of course, and there will be some people who are de-radicalised. But the trouble is, our prisons are not good at de-radicalising. They're not good at, they're not good at stopping people from committing crime, let alone de-radicalising hardened terrorists. So I think most of the general public would think if someone was sentenced to 15 years in prison, then they should do 15 years in prison, not an automatic release at halfway or 2/3 of the way as it's going to be soon. So I think we as the public need to speak up and say, look, terrorist prisoners do need to be treated differently than your average con. They are more dangerous. These are people that want to kill lots and lots of people. Mass terror is their aim. That's why they went to prison. And some of them were actually, very deeply involved, in fact, organising others to commit terrorist acts. So we shouldn't be treating them the same as normal prisoners.
Chris Phillips, good to talk to you. Thanks for your time. Thanks a lot. Join me in the next hour. I'm going to be discussing the lateral flow test shortage, as well as more on Ghislaine Maxwell's conviction. First, the real me now with Gloria De Piero.
It's time to remind ourselves there's always another winter. Canary Islands sponsors the weather.